He was born too small. Too weak. So fragile, they didn't think he'd survive the night. His father had already died months before he was born. His mother? She would abandon him just a few years later. And the world? It didn't care. But that fragile, forgotten boy, Isaac Newton, would go on to tear apart the very fabric of nature, rewrite the laws of reality, and become the man we now call the father of modern science. But his journey? It wasn't some fairy tale of natural genius. No, this was a brutal, raw fight against poverty, loneliness, rejection, and the crushing weight of his own mind. It was Christmas Day, 1642, in the small, forgotten village of Woolsthorpe, England. A cold winter clawed at the stone walls of a modest farmhouse, where a tiny, premature infant fought for life. Born so small that his mother later said he could fit inside a quart mug, Isaac Newton wasn't expected to live through the night. His father, a simple farmer, had died before Isaac was even born, leaving him fatherless and fragile. Life, from its very first breath, was against him. And just when things seemed stable, it cracked again. When Isaac was 3, his mother remarried, but her new husband didn't want a child. So, she left Isaac behind, placing him in the care of his grandmother, and vanished into another life. Think about that. At just 3 years old, abandoned by the one person who was supposed to love him unconditionally. It left a mark, deep. And that scar followed him forever. Isaac grew up quiet, isolated, and deeply withdrawn. While other children played, he sat alone, building crude windmills, sketching strange inventions, and scribbling in old notebooks. His classmates mocked him. Teachers dismissed him. He wasn't the loud kid, the athletic kid, or even the clever one. But inside, his mind was boiling, a mind that didn't just want answers, it needed them. In his teenage years, Isaac was pulled out of school by his mother, who wanted him to become a farmer. But Newton? He was terrible at it. He didn't care for crops or cattle, he wanted to tinker, to study, to think. A local teacher noticed this and pushed his mother to let him return to school. It was there that Isaac's curiosity became obsession. In 1661, he scraped together enough money to attend Cambridge University, but not as a Nobel scholar. No. He entered as a servant student, working menial jobs to pay his fees. He washed dishes, cleaned floors, lived in near poverty. While other students mingled and debated, Newton sat alone, devouring books by philosophers and mathematicians, scribbling equations in candlelit rooms. But still, he was unnoticed, just another face in the crowd. Until fate struck again. In 1665, the Great Plague swept through England, forcing Cambridge to shut its doors. The city emptied. The streets went silent. Newton packed his books, returned to his mother's farmhouse, and the world went on pause. But for Newton, this wasn't a pause, this was ignition. Alone in the countryside, far from the noise of the city, Isaac Newton entered what history now calls his Year of Wonders. No professors. No formal classes. Just a young man, a stack of books, a restless mind, and an endless thirst for truth. It was here, in isolation, that Newton invented calculus, the mathematics that would go on to power physics, engineering, and modern computing. It was here that he cracked the code of optics, using a simple prism to show that white light wasn't pure, it was made of all the colors of the rainbow. And yes, it was here, under the shade of an apple tree, that he saw an apple fall and asked the question that no one else dared to: why did it fall down? What invisible force pulled it to the earth? That apple didn't hit him on the head, but it did hit his mind. It led to his theory of universal gravitation, the idea that everything, from a falling apple to the moon in the sky, is connected by the same invisible force. When Newton returned to Cambridge, he wasn't the same unnoticed servant student. He was a man who had cracked the mechanics of the cosmos. In 1687, he published the legendary Principia Mathematica, a book so profound it reshaped science forever. He laid out the 3 laws of motion, the backbone of classical mechanics, and proved that the universe wasn't chaos, it was a machine, governed by rules. Predictable. Knowable. For the first time in history, the orbits of planets, the tides of oceans, and the flight of projectiles could be explained by math. It was the foundation of modern physics. But Newton wasn't some untouchable genius. He was deeply flawed. Paranoid. Obsessive. He worked alone, often forgetting to eat, locking himself in his study for days. He chased not just science, but alchemy, theology, and the search for deeper, often spiritual truths. Despite his genius, he was haunted by loneliness. He never married. Had no children. His closest relationships were often strained. But he kept pushing, because, for Newton, discovery wasn't a choice, it was survival. When he died in 1727, at the age of 84, Isaac Newton left behind a world forever changed. He transformed how humanity understood nature, motion, and the very forces that shape our existence. And yet, he once humbly said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." But the truth? He became the giant. So, what's the real takeaway here? Isaac Newton wasn't born a legend. He wasn't gifted an easy path. He was abandoned, overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated, until he wasn't. Because while others stopped at failure, Newton kept asking, kept pushing, kept going deeper. And that's the power of relentless curiosity. The next time you feel stuck, outcast, or ignored, remember, Isaac Newton started with nothing. No wealth. No status. Just a mind that refused to quit. And that's how you change the world.